Welcome. My name is Neil. This is my buddy Al, and we're going to tell you a little bit about the Wind River in Yukon, Canada, which is an amazing canoe river where you can go up and enjoy the mountains and the wilderness and the Great White North.
As someone who has canoed mostly in Ontario, being up in the Yukon was a real game changer. As they say, it was north of extraordinary. I had never canoed with that sort of a current. I had never canoed with that many mountains surrounding the river. It was really a neat combination of both a hiking trip and a canoe trip.
So you can kind of divide the Wind River into three parts. There's the upper Wind River, the middle Wind River, and then the Peel River before the most common takeout, which is at Taco Bar. So let's talk a little bit about the upper Wind River. So this is, you take the float plane into a little lake called McCluskey Lake. Very placid environment. There's a 250-meter portage into McCluskey Creek, and then you start on the upper Wind River.
Yeah, so what I would most note about the Upper Wind River is that you're really nestled in the mountains. And there might be a temptation because everyone starts really energetically at the beginning of a trip to really paddle hard at the beginning. I would encourage you to slow roll that part of the trip. I would think about if you have some 0 days that you take it early on so that you can really enjoy the wonderful mountain scenery and just the beauty of both the creek and then the Wind River itself.
And the water there is shallow, clear, and fast moving. So you don't actually have to spend a lot of effort to paddle. You can rudder and steer your way around. The danger though is that you're making tight turns. So it's not technical, it's not whitewater, but it does require maneuvering through and kind of watching the water. And in particular, if you're coming to a blind turn, we had great advice from a guide, Jake Fell, who told us, don't take a blind turn blind. So if you see a blind turn, it's worth eddying out, taking a look, and making sure that there aren't any sweepers, because it's a small creek and you don't want to have sweepers. The other thing is there's tons of channels throughout, so the river tends to be braided, so you have to watch for that as well.
And Neil, one thing that you mentioned during the trip was that you want to take the established braids, not the new ones, because the newer braids tend to have overturned trees on them, and that they can really catch a canoeist. And in fact, you may recall we hit a couple of those.
They also, where the braids meet, you kind of get a big volume of water. Our outfitter really encouraged us to bring skirts on our canoes. We found it a little bit overkill, but it was reassuring to have them. So you might want to think about having a skirt on your canoe just to make sure that you don't take water on in those situations.
One of the things that you mentioned, Neil, that I totally agree with is just the clarity of the water. It was actually a bit off-putting because it almost felt like you were canoeing over rocks. And so we would look for blue in the water. And that just meant there was just a little bit more water, and it usually guided us to the right braid.
So that's the upper wind. Some great campsites. We've got a map here that we had that's in French of the Wind River, which shows some great campsites, and it's worth taking the campsites that are marked because there's some really beautiful ones there.
I'd just like to note two campsites that were exceptional. The first is at basically the confluence of McCluskey Creek and the start of the Wind River, and it's river left. And what's notable about it is it's a flat plain, an alluvial plain. And at the time in August, it was filled with Arctic cotton, and it was just an exceptional site. It was also good for grayling fishing as well. And just one tip on the grayling fishing, thing about grayling is that it deteriorates really quickly. So if you're gonna catch one and your intention is to cook it, you need to cook it pretty quickly. The second site is actually my favorite site of any canoe trip I've ever been on. And that is a site which was river right across from Bond Creek. So what made it exceptional? A couple things. One, as you're facing the river from the campsite, if you just go up a plane, there's a plateau, and it's just a fantastic place to just look at Bond Creek, look at the mountains surrounding, and it's flat, it's beautiful, it's a place where you just want to contemplate life. It was outstanding. The other thing to note is that if there are mountains behind you on River Right that are really good for rock scrambling, you just climb up the ridgeline. What you need to do is go downriver until you find a clearing and walk up that to the ridgeline. It's basically Like you can imagine that's where the creeks would flow down from the mountains, and there are fewer trees. The way we did is we bushwhacked a lot and then got to the ridgeline. It's far easier if you go where there are fewer trees and then just climb up the ridgeline. Here's an area where you need to be comfortable that you're in bear country though, because we did see a lot of bear scat with soap berries mixed in. Be sure you've got your noisemakers and your bear spray at the ready, but it's a wonderful rock scramble. The views from the ridgeline are spectacular. One last tip for Bond Creek campsite is that, well, maybe two things. The first thing is it's pretty hard to get wood, so you should collect your wood before you get to the campsite. And the second thing is there's another good hike just across the river where you walk up Bond Creek.
Okay, let's talk about the middle Wind River, where the water is even more voluminous than the upper wind. You're going faster. I clocked us once at 12 kilometers per hour just in the water like that. So you have to be conscious of your steering, but there's no technical white water, but you're ripping down the river. And to pull over, you really have to truly eddy out. You can't just pull up to the shore like that. But the scenes are spectacular. You're in the mountains as you zip along. And there's tons of braiding in the river. So in a group, you need to stay together as you go through the middle wind.
The middle wind is where the Wind River really merited its name. The wind was mostly in our face, which turns out to be good when it comes to wildlife spotting. You'll recall, Neil, that we saw a couple of woodland caribou that we probably would not have seen had the wind been blowing our scent downwards. I also recall just like, this is fun paddling, right? Like you mentioned the current. It was just fun picking out the braids and just, you have to pay attention, right? Because you occasionally have overturned trees that you need to navigate around, but this is fun paddling. I felt I was at Disney World at one point. As a rock hound, I do have to mention that there are just streams and streams of river rocks. The mineral content, you mentioned the coal seams that were there. They were smoking. I noticed they smoked more on the peel than on the wind, but in any event, it was the first time I'd seen coal in kind of open veins of coal, and I'd never seen it smoking before. But everyone will want to get a river rock of whatever your preference is. And the only concern is if you have a partner that gets too obsessed with these things and tries to, I don't know, kind of collect the entire riverbed. But it's spectacular and a lot of fun.
So then we got down to the Peel River. So the Peel River is a major river in the area. There's lots of great whitewater river trips that feed the Peel. You can think of the Snake River, the Bonnet Plume River, the Heart River. The Peel River was made famous by the Protect the Peel movement, which was a combination of First Nations and environmental groups to really preserve this entire watershed.
As you say, we'd been told it was the less interesting part of the trip. I found it fascinating. One of the things that made it really fascinating is all the geologic strata. So I don't know if this can be seen properly, but you had like a kind of a cavern of 1,000 faces that you could kind of read into the rocks that I thought was beautiful. One thing I just mentioned at the confluence of the Wind and the Peel is that there are 4 very nice campsites. And you'll recall, Neil, that that's where there was a bit of there were other people at that campsite. So I think my tip on that one is to take the first one that's available, which is river left just before you hit the Peel River. It's a fantastic campsite. That's where we also had seams of coal, if you'll remember. We had actually used it to kind of light our morning fire to cook our oatmeal. So that's a very good site, but there are also 3 other sites just right on the more of the Peel side of it. Lots of space for everyone. It's possible to explore. You could stop at the first campsite and then eddy over to get to the other side of the river and then explore the campsites on the Peel if you want. I think for our purposes, that first campsite was an excellent one. That's where we saw grizzly bears, but that is something that, you'll want to, it's easy to get by and you can't go backwards. That's one thing for the entire trip. The current is such that once you pass a campsite, it's gone. You're not going to get it again. So my advice is to take the first campsite. I would say that in contrast to the Wind, the Peel tends to be a bit muddier. And so that you may not have water that's this crystal clear looking. It's still as fresh, but it's going to be a bit muddier. And one thing that I found on the Peel that maybe it was just unique to our trip. Watch out for raptors. So we saw bald eagles, peregrine falcons, merlins, red-tailed hawks, and they used the updraft around the river to really soar, and it was just spectacular watching them at one of the campsites right in kind of the center of the canyon, if you remember.
And actually targeting that campsite right in the canyon was also brilliant. It's tempting to take a couple of the campsites leading into some of the canyons, but if you can get the ones right directly in the middle of the canyons, it is just spectacular.
It's worth it to get the campsite on River Right. It's right where I think, Neil, that you mentioned the class threes were, but they weren't really class threes during August when we were there. You're seeing, by the way, like geological strata that's like billions of years old. I think the guidebook said up to 4 billion years old. Like this is early rock on Earth. So it's fantastic. Slate, a lot of slate in the area too. One thing I noticed is I made the mistake of going into the forest a little bit, and there you started to see what, kind of the epic bugs that make up the region.
And then further on down the Peel, you're like the entire trip, you're moving fast. You don't have to get to your takeout early because you will easily make the times.
That campsite was about 5 or 6 kilometers in advance of Taco Bar. I think it's well worth getting to. It was our last full night, and it was a spectacular campsite. There's a black gravel river right campsite. One tip on Taco Bar is at least last season they had the sign saying Taco Bar, but the actual float plane will only come about 150 meters downriver. It won't go up to the sign. So,
Okay, so we've gone from McCluskey Lake to Taco Bar. It was about 13 nights for us. We could have easily stayed longer. It was that gorgeous. There's tons of hiking. We could have done more hiking. We could have done more, so you could easily take more time in that trip. Now, a couple of other things to note. When we were there were forest fires in the area. In fact, for 2 days, we carried masks and paddled with masks, and you could see the forest fires. We have heard of other groups that had to be extracted by helicopter or by float plane because of forest fires. So you really want to have your sat phone. You are in the deep wilderness there. Also, as I mentioned, the water is cold, so you have to be prepared for cold water. Some of us brought dry suits. We wore them a couple of days. Also, the air is cold. You have to have a sleeping pad with a high R value, maybe a winter tent. Even if it's in the middle of the summer, you should plan for the cold with toques and backup clothes and so forth.
I would say too that for those of you who are doing navigating, I'd make 2 points. One is you can make distance. You can go 50, even 60 kilometers with that current that Neil was talking about earlier. The second thing I would note that particularly in the Peel where the river does tend to widen from the wind, make sure that you're close to the side that you want to put out in because you can blow by sites. It's hard to eddy out, and if you're not careful, you'll go past where you're intending to land. So I would just urge caution on that.
One other fast current tip worth researching is the river rescue in any kind of an incident on such fast moving water is slightly different than in southern rivers. So if, for example, one of the boats were to tip, it would be gone. So make sure that you have a float bag with rope tied to the one end of every canoe. And in the event of a tip, the chasing canoe catches up to the canoe that's swamped, links together some of those throw ropes, and then actually goes ahead of it or in parallel with it to the shore, and then pendulums the canoe to shore. And you have to do that kind of rapid rescue of an overturned boat, or else you will lose the boat, potentially very far downriver. So something worth researching, and it's distinctly different from a southern trip from these northern trips. A few logistical notes. There are many outfitters and many float plane operators that serve the wind. If you Google Wind River Yukon, you will get all kinds of options. However, the ones we used we would use again. So I just want to mention them. Up North Adventures was the outfitter that we used for the ground shuttle from Whitehorse to Mayo, about a 5-hour ground shuttle. And they also rented us the canoes and the gear, and they were really professional and a great outfit. I would use them again. Also, we used Alcan Air, which was our float plane operator out of Mayo into McCluskey Lake. They also, of course, picked us up from Taco Bar and took us back to Mayo. A great family-owned operation, and I would use them again in a heartbeat. Also, just a note about Whitehorse. So it was our first trip canoeing north of 60, which included several days in Whitehorse, which we were really thankful to do. There's tons to do in the Whitehorse area. There's hiking in city limits. There is a hot spring not far, and then there's also Kluane National Park, where if you wanted to go for hiking, and some of our partners did go on multi-day hikes in Kluane National Park, which is also fantastic. So strongly recommend if you're going to make that distance, take the time and spend a few days or more in Whitehorse.
I'd do a shout out to Yukon Inn, which were great hosts for us. And they also have that breakfast place that's attached to it where they have the salmon home fries, which were spectacular.
So there you have it. That is the Wind River in Yukon, Canada, the Upper Wind, the Middle Wind, the Peel River, and all parts in between. A fantastic mountainous trip with lots of features, lots of wildlife, a great first northern trip for us, and we would recommend for others. So we hope you get a chance to enjoy the Wind River. Maybe we'll see you up there.